Carolyn is a co-founder of the company HelloSci, where she teaches smart people to be funny, hailing from Hotlanta, Georgia, although no one calls it that.
Thanks. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna talk about comedy and AI, or how to teach a robot to tell a joke. So just a quick thing about me. So by training, I'm an ecologist statistician, but now I'm an entrepreneur. So I co-founded a company with a comedian. So together we help tech companies express their ideas in a way that's entertaining and engaging. And another big thing we do is help them incorporate humor into their technology. So for example, here's a picture of me with Sophia the robot. You might know her. She's like a pretty famous humanoid social robot. So my business partner and I were part of her personality team that worked on her dialogue system. Okay, so why does AI need humor anyway? So as computing power and internet speed are improving rapidly, there are becoming a lot more opportunities for practical applications for social robots. So one big area that we're seeing social robots is in nursing home with elder care, but they can also be helpers. You're starting to see them in hospitals and also in like airports, and even some shopping malls will have robot assistants, as well as on your phone with like Siri and Alexa. And so humans generally view humor as something that's unique to people. So when robots use humor, people view them as more human-like, and they tend to form a more emotional connection, and they're more trusting, and they actually rate their interactions with humorous robots as more enjoyable. And this is really important if you're a company looking into applications with customer service with robots or chatbots. Okay, so how would we train AI with humor? So I'm going to go through the three major subdomains of machine learning: supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. And this conveniently kind of maps on different, discrete steps. So step one would be, teach your robot to tell, what is a joke and what isn't. So if it hears something, it can know if it was serious or not. And step two would be teaching your robot to invent its own jokes. And then step three is teaching your robot to tell if their jokes are actually landing. Is what they said funny or not? Okay, so first, supervised learning. So if you're not familiar with it, it requires correct input and output pairs for you to train your model on. So an example in comedy would be if you trained a model with a data set that had a list of things that are funny, and you label those as funny, and then a list of things that are not funny. Okay, so this is a DIY example that you can do yourself, even in the span of an afternoon. And this example is by someone called Aaron Edel. So what he did was he trained a classifier model on headlines. Some are satirical, like from the Onion. I'm sure you're familiar. So an example is hungover man horrified to learn he made dozens of plans last night, versus a serious headline. So he spent most of his hour just compiling examples of each, and labeling them satire or serious, right? And then he quickly ran a classifier model, and he found that the model could correctly predict if a headline was satirical 83% of the time. And this is just an hour-long, quick thing that you could do. And then, so that's great. However, it's a little different than the AI or the robot telling its own jokes. Oh, hold on. There we go. So here's an example of how you could use a classifier model and to tell a joke in a very limited sense. And that would be a "that's what she said" joke. And so if you've ever thought to yourself, I would love to read pages of academic text explaining what a "that's what she said" joke is and how it works, this is the paper for you. It's a study out of the University of Washington. So what they did, similar to the last thing, except they had a list of phrases that would be a great "that's what she said" joke, and then a list of phrases that would not make any sense as a "that's what she said" joke. And so they trained the model with the classifier model. And so what they found was the robot correctly said "that's what she said" at the end of a sentence, 72% of the time. And this quote here is an actual example from the paper. So no joke, it's a great paper. Okay, so next up is unsupervised learning. So this is a bit different than supervised because you don't need to feed it, pairs of inputs and outputs. And this can be useful in situations where there may not be a right answer, or maybe you can't really observe them or obtain them, or you need to find patterns like where a human wouldn't be able to see it. So an example of this would be if you trained models on transcripts of stand-up comedies or like collections of jokes. All right, and so here's another DIY example that you could do by yourself, as like a fun weekend project. So this person, Keaton Patty, they trained a recurrent neural network model on transcripts from stand-up comedy routines with over 1,000 hours of stand-up. And the way the recurrent neural network models work is like, in this case, they're looking at the sequence of words, and given a given sequence, they want to predict what words would come next based on the data that you put in the training set, right? So here, this is an example of the model output. So I'm going to read just a little bit. So it says, we see a standing up. They microphone so hard. Last yesterday, my son say he want to be Tony Hawk. I say, if you want to be bird, hollow your bones. The audience laughs. Birds have evaded humor for too long. This guy gets it. So that's, so it's like, in my opinion, it's very amusing, and I'm impressed that it makes any sense at all. But I think if you read like hours and hours of it, you might get a little bit tired of it. I think it's like the novelty and the randomness that's funny, at least in my opinion. You might have a different opinion. But for something you could do in a weekend, I think it's outstanding. Okay, and here's another DIY example. And this one has a GitHub, so you can check this out. You could check out the code if you wanted to. And so another technique people use is transfer learning. So you would have a pre-trained model, and then you can apply it to a new task with just adding a relatively small amount of new data. So like, for example, what this person did is they used this GPT-2 model by OpenAI. So this model has been pre-trained. So your model would, it already has some, it's pretty good at replicating human speech, so you're at least there. You don't have to redo all of that work. But then what this person did, Lorenzo Ampil, he added an extra training data set that is just, it's open source, it's available on Kaggle, for example. It's just like a long list with thousands of different jokes. And so if you give it like a seed, like why did the chicken cross the road, or why did the government ... it'll complete it for you. So for example, some of them, why did the chicken cross the road? He was being thrown off the farm, or like because he got beat up and messed up. So as you can see, they're like a little random, but this just perfectly matches with my experience with trying to do this kind of thing, where like sometimes it's great, but other times it's just like, what does that even mean? So it's a little hit or miss. But if you're in a position where you can cherry pick the good ones, then it can be pretty cool and fun project, and fun to see what it comes up with. And I wanted to throw in this bonus one. So I know we've been talking about machine learning, but sometimes there's still situations where it's just not going to cut it. So like, for example, if you were training a deep learning model on thousands of puns, it would probably result in nonsense because they're just very clear-cut rules that need to be followed to make a pun. So taking insight from humor theory, you can make these kinds of models like this researcher did with puns, where they fed the model like pairs that would be okay to switch out. So this is like hair, like a rabbit, versus like hair on your head. And in the end result, it could be like the greyhound stopped to get a haircut. But one interesting thing is like you could try to pair this type of setup with machine learning. So I'm about to talk about reinforcement learning, but like you could have it see, if it was funny or not, and then over time it'd be better at predicting, all of the whole possibilities, which ones are actually funny. And I think that this could be applied to this kind of rules-based thing, or it could even be applied to, like in the previous slide, the GPT-2 model, where it's a little bit hit or miss. So with that, let me get into a little bit more about the reinforcement learning and how that works. So in this type of learning, we also don't provide the input-output pairs, but we do need to provide a method for the machine to quantify its performance in the form of a reward. So the classic example of this is training a model to play a game by just handing over the controls and letting it learn how to win through trial and error. So if it beats the level or beats the boss, it knows like, yes, that was good, and then try to do that type of behavior more in the future that led to that good outcome. So with the joke, the win condition is making someone laugh. And so how would this work with comedy? So for example, you build a joke bot, it generates a joke, and in response, the human can select either funny or not funny. And in this way, the model learns what's funny in a real life context and through feedback from a human. In a more complex scenario, you could even use a classifier model to recognize the human is laughing or smiling, and then you would use that to reinforce the funny behaviors. And by the way, this is my business partner. Okay, and then, so there has been research into this kind of technique. So in this study from Germany, they had participants sit down with this robot, and the robot would either tell, random jokes, over several different sessions, or the robot would try to learn. They would detect that the person smiled or laughed at the joke, and then they would try to tell jokes that were to the personal preference of that, test subject. And so while they found that the subjects, they found the bots that were learning funnier than the bots who just told random jokes. However, there's a big caveat that basically the most important factor was the first impression. So if the robot completely bombed on the first session, that would completely color how the person viewed the robot. So that, yes, that's really important. And then this, I can also offer another caveat from my own personal experience is from working with, the robots in the field interacting with people. Like when people interact with the robot, especially if it's the first time, it's very awkward. So they'll smile, but it's more like out of awkwardness, or they'll laugh out of nervousness, or sometimes they just didn't even hear what the robot said. And so they'll just be polite and smile. So, or maybe, they're just laughing at the robot, so it's just hard. Like, I think so far it's pretty hard, especially with the models we have now. Like, we can't really tell why the person was smiling or laughing, if they actually thought it was funny or not. So that's one limitation. So yeah, so in conclusion, human in AI it's a still very challenging and active area of research and experimentation. But as virtual assistants and chatbots become more common than ever, people are expecting for robots to be more human-like, and humor is an enormous part of how humans perceive humanness in robots. And in the future, there also will need to be more work beyond just the text on the actual delivery. So for example, there's studies that show people find robots funnier when there's a delivery versus just reading it. So they'll have to work on the verbal cadence, the tone, and the facial expressions for both listening to the human and telling if the human's joking or not, as well as their own delivery and telling the joke, and being able to communicate better with a human. Okay, well, that's the end. And I'm Carolyn, and I put my email here in case you want to try any of those DIY examples. I can send you the slides, and I have all the links. And also the paper, the amazing paper about the That's What She Said jokes. Yeah, let me know if anybody has questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. That was awesome.
Yay.
You can only hear one person clapping at a time, but
Oh, no. I'm imagining the standing ovation that's happening right now. But, yeah.
Gabe, I know you work with chatbots. Do you think LifeLink has any plans to incorporate humor, or?
Yeah, our test bots when we started were all very humorous, but as we got into like the emergency room and other contexts like that, we took a lot of that out.
Yeah, no, I read a paper that they studied that. So like robots that were very like task oriented, humor was not so important. But if it was exploratory, like a museum guide or something like that, then humor became like very important. How it created the interaction with the robot. So no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
some hospitals have like not in the emergency rooms, but they'll have robots that just help entertain the patients, you know.
We do have a few games in one of them. If you're in the waiting room, you can like choose from some simple games.
That's awesome.
But yeah,
Yeah.
we're afraid of jokes. We're like, I don't know what what one that's normally funny, but it's going to not be funny in this particular context.
Yeah, jokes are, it's trickier for AI because it's so context dependent, and you would just like need an unfathomable amount of data to know what the specific context is, and like read the room and like see the person, you know, the person's situation. And so I think it's really fascinating.
Also, I guess jokes change over time. Like I've been watching a lot of Jerry Seinfeld stand up.
Yeah.
And I remember in high school people saying jokes from Seinfeld and me being like, that's so funny. But watching it now, it's like this guy is obsessed with uh minutia that isn't as funny to me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that gets into also like humor theory, you know, like why do we find things funny? Like a lot of it is like reversal of expectation, but once something gets told so many times, it's not surprising anymore, you know? So
But it's like if something gets said so much, it reaches this plateau. Like that's what she said.
yeah.
It's like maybe funny the first time and then not funny a million times and then the millionth and one time. It's funny again.
Imagine this poor bot spending years learning that's what she said, and then it's like, sorry, that's not cool anymore.
Very relatable.
Yeah, I feel for the robots, yeah. That's tough. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you for